Thank you.
Perfect.
Steve Jobs, a personal computer pioneer. How did he do it? How did he do it the first time? By the age of 21. That's the story I'm going to tell. Steve Jobs was born in 1955 in San Francisco. He almost immediately was moved down to Mountain View, which is one of the towns of Silicon Valley. I haven't heard that term in years, but that's the valley just below San Francisco and San Francisco Bay. Many different nearby towns there. So he grew up with this high technology all around him. When he was a boy, he would tinker in the garage with his father. They would take electronic things apart and put them back together. And of course, there would be mechanical stuff in the garage as well. And now, when he's 16 years old, it's 1971. And things start to get even more interesting. He's a junior in high school, and he meets Steve Wozniak. Now, Steve is the other Steve. So these two guys are the two Steves, Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak. Steve Wozniak is 4.5 years older than Steve Jobs. And he loves the computers, and he's a designer, and he's doing some college, but he's not finished yet. And he meets this Steve Wozniak, who would eventually be the co-founder of Apple Computer. During that time in high school, Steve Jobs would attend after-school lectures at nearby Hewlett-Packard Company. That's a Hewlett-Packard personal computer right there. He also got a job as a summer employee at Hewlett-Packard with Steve Wozniak. There's the other Steve again. In 1972, Steve Jobs graduated from high school. He went to junior college up in Oregon at a college called Reed College. Never heard of that before. He dropped out after one semester. But he was searching. He was not lazy. He stayed at Reed College for 2 years, and he would audit all the different classes. So he was taking everything in. In 1974, 2 years after graduation, he returned back to the Silicon Valley area, and he got a job as a technician at Atari. Atari made computer games in those days. You put a quarter in if you were out somewhere, and you could play the game. He took a leave of absence, or actually just quit. He went to India, became a Buddhist, shaved his head, came back, experimented with LSD, and then he got serious again. By 1975, 3 years now after graduation, he goes back to work at Atari. And he starts attending the Homebrew Computer Club. Now these are electronic hobbyists. Homebrew Computer Club with Steve Wozniak. Now, Steve Wozniak, in 1976, he had what was known in those days as a video teletype. Better than the old mechanical machine maybe many of you have never seen. But the video teletype was basically what was known in those days as a dumb terminal. And Steve Wozniak had designed this himself and took the parts and wired it all up himself. But it was still a dumb terminal. But eventually, the price of basically it wasn't an Intel, but an Intel microprocessor in those days cost $173. So triple or quadruple that price. So a $500 or $600 part, Steve Wozniak can't really afford. But one of the other companies in 1976 came out with a $20 CPU chip. So in today's dollars, that'd be about 60 to 80 bucks. Steve Wozniak immediately put that into his design, wired it up, and hauled his machine off to the homebrew computer club, where his friend Steve Jobs was attending that club as well. Everybody was impressed with this. Jobs convinced Wozniak of the commercial hobby machine's commercial success. This thing could sell. It was right up to date. So in 1976, 21-year-old Steve Jobs realized this. He was the one that realized the commercial viability of this low-cost microprocessor. So he went to a nearby computer store called the Bike Shop and said, hey, I want to sell you this. The computer store says, okay, we'll buy 50 of them at $500 a piece. That's basically $2,200 in today's dollars. So he takes the purchase order from the Bike Shop store over to Kramer Electronics, which is a nationwide distributor, and says, I'd like to buy these parts. Well, the credit manager looks at this 21-year-old and says, well, how are you going to pay for that? Well, Steve Jobs says, if you give me the parts, net 30, that means I don't have to pay for them for 30 days. We can assemble the computers, deliver them to the Bike Shop retail store, collect on delivery. I'll have the money, and I'll have more than enough to pay you. So the credit manager called the owner of the Bike Shop and confirmed all this. And they shipped the parts. The two Steves and their small crew worked day and night for a month. They delivered those computers on time, got the money, and paid for their purchase order. That computer was just a board. There was no keyboard, no monitor. But it was about the size of 1 or 2 sheets of paper. But it had all the electronics. All you had to do was plug in an off-the-shelf keyboard, and with a little gizmo, you could run it on a standard TV. Jobs financed this operation without selling any shares. After the Bike Shop, that first 50, Apple Computer sold the rest of the machines directly through mail order or whatever for $666, about $2,500 a piece in today's dollars. They sold about 200 apples. That's about $500,000 worth of sales in that first year. By 1977, after 18 months, they stopped because the Apple II, a complete personal computer, was for sale and selling big time. By 1980, this is 8 years after Steve Jobs graduated, he was 26 years old, Apple Computer became public. The IPO brought in more money. There was a second only to the initial IPO for Ford Motor Company in 1956. Over 300 people became instant millionaires. That's it.